We live in a world overconsumed with plastic. Plastic is this invisible, sort of lurking menace around us at all times, and it's hiding in things that you don't even realize. The filter of a cigarette is made of plastic. Body care products have hidden plastic in them, and they're called microbeads. And microbeads are tiny little balls of plastic that are put in toothpaste, facial scrubs, in all kinds of bath products. And they're meant to exfoliate, or I guess in the case of the toothpaste, they're meant to scrub your teeth, but who wants to scrub plastic into their pores and chew on it in their mouth? Another one is, and this is my own personal confession because I am addicted to chewing gum, and it's made of plastic. So microfibers are the tiny threads of material that come off our clothing. And because so much of our clothing is actually made of plastic, the synthetics, the nylons, the latexes, the spandex, all these sorts of synthetic materials are actually shedding to a huge extent small particles of plastic in the form of threads and fibers.
71% of the Earth is covered in water. The Earth also generates a large amount of wind. And when water from the oceans and wind interact, they create a gyre.
A gyre is a large circulating ocean current, and it tends to sweep in a different direction depending on which hemisphere of the Earth that you're in. There are 5, and they're a circulating current, and each major ocean system has a gyre. Gyres are naturally occurring phenomena of the planet.
But plastic isn't naturally occurring. So what happens when our plastic pollution gets thrown into the mix?
In 2006, I had been going to Hawaii for a number of years, but I'd never been to the Big Island, and I was kind of magnetically drawn to the south point of the Big Island. That's the southern tip of the United States. It's the southernmost point in the Hawaiian chain, and when I got there, I wanted to see that edge between the sea and the land with this face of the Pacific coming up. And when I got there, I saw mountainous, multicolored, immense piles of plastic that the ocean was vomiting out on the shores. And it was so shocking that I stopped the work that I was doing at that time. I felt I was entering a crime scene. I felt I had to document it photographically, and I had to take the evidence back and bring it to show people. And so that was the birth of the Drifters Project. I had gotten a phone call from Howard Farron, who was the Director of Conservation at the Alaska Sea Life Center, and he said that he had this idea. He wanted to take artists and scientists out on an expedition to remote parts of Alaska to address the plastic pollution problem there. And I said, I'm in, I help you in any way I can. And so we launched just with that conversation, and Carl Safina got on board at that point. Carl Safina is a writer, a naturalist, a scientist, and I think really a voice for most of the pressing environmental issues on the world today. He's amazing. I think, he is an extraordinary thinker and observer. It was thrilling to me to be able to spend time with that kind of mind and that kind of naturalist. And so we contacted J.J. Kelly, who had done a lot of shooting in Alaska already and made a film called Paddle to Seattle. And JJ was thrilled with the idea, and so he came up and we did a kind of scouting mission.
I lived up in Alaska during college, and I'd seen these pristine waterways, and I was surprised to see little bits and pieces of garbage and plastic showing up in a remote part of the world where most people go to see extraordinary scenery. Why was this garbage getting there? And I was approached by a team of artists and scientists who were going to go out on a ship to Alaska and survey this marine landscape. So I pitched the idea to National Geographic, and we made a film about this expedition in one of the most beautiful places in the world, asking the question, why is garbage from as far away as Asia showing up on remote beaches in Alaska? Think about a plastic bottle. It's so easy to go to a grocery store or to go to a bodega and grab a plastic bottle, drink it, and throw that thing away. But think about when that leaves your hands, it will last on this planet longer than you will.
Even though the EPA has stated that a plastic bottle will decompose in 450 years, it never really decomposes the way a leaf will turn back into soil. It only breaks down into smaller and smaller particles, but they're still particles of plastic.
40 tons of debris wash up on our shores every year. So how does plastic pollution even begin to end up in our oceans?
When I went to Africa in 2010, 2011 for about 3 months, I saw waste being strewn across the savannah. It was 80 kilometers driving in from Masai Mara, the game reserve. I just saw plastic bags, bejeweling all the trees on the way and all the brush. And so I began this one-woman cleanup effort while I was there. And I think ultimately, if we don't connect consumers to the choices they're making and then bring back how they impact global ecosystems during their travels, because the majority of the trash that I found and collected in Africa was actually from American markets or Western Europe, So it was like Tampax and L'Oreal and MAC, products that we see in stores here, lying around with zebras munching on them, and that's not okay.
But it's not just the animals in Africa that suffer.
So in 2008, I was invited to be a resident artist in an artist colony that was happening during the Olympics in Beijing. And because I was already working with plastic and I was extremely curious to find out about these garbage villages that I'd heard about in China, that's what I decided my project was going to be. So as it turned out, my place that I was living was directly next to a local Chinese village that was actually a garbage recycling hutong. Because the Olympics were there, it made the project even more interesting because they had actually made it illegal to recycle during the Olympics because they didn't want to have the world eye looking at these people picking through the trash. When I approached this garbage village that was next door with a translator, it was extraordinarily moving and sad and intense to get to know those people because they are literally living in piles and piles and piles of garbage. Their homes are made of the garbage and the scraps that they find. Babies are being born, food is being cooked, children are playing. Family life, normal family life for them is taking place in the piles of refuse that the city of Beijing creates. It was really kind of incredible to see the human cost of this material. That also has to do with class and the social breakdown of economy and how the people at the very bottom of the economic ladder are kind of bearing the brunt of the convenience and unawareness of the higher social levels. Julianne Wang made this film because over 10 million tons of plastic waste is imported to China from the United States every year. This is not a sustainable model, and it really struck me in a very personal way because I had gotten to know some of those people. Greece is another situation where I felt like I was kind of called to that island. I noticed that there was this call for proposals to work on the island of Kefalonia from the Ionian Center, and the name of it was ion-ion, like two ions, two positive charges coming together, and it attracted me. For me, the most interesting thing is that the island itself is ringed by caves. So there's all kinds of sea caves on this island, and as I started understanding the geography and exploring different parts of it, I noticed that plastic seemed to collect in the caves. So I was able to find 2 women to swim with me. I wanted it to be this kind of silent and anonymous work. So we all wore the same outfits, a kind of uniform. We were able to lift this giant mass of these bags of plastic that I'd tied into this kind of island over the rocks without tearing the bags, get it into the water, and then float it and swim it back around. So I was able to invite my friend Deanna Cohen, She couldn't imagine that I was on this island because her paternal grandfather was from that very island. I invited her to come the next year, and so she came back and we began the beginning of our collaboration on that island.
I think it's important for people to learn about plastic pollution. When we talk about plastic pollution, we're talking about single-use and disposable plastics. And what we'd like to do is educate people and raise awareness so that they feel empowered to make other choices in their life that will help them reduce their exposure to toxic chemicals. Plastic bottles and plastic packaging are made with groups of chemicals called phthalates and bisphenols. You may have heard this is BPA free, so they might be using another bisphenol if it's BPA free, like BPS. These chemicals are known endocrine disruptors, so they function like synthetic hormones, and micro amounts of them leach through our plastic water bottles, plastic beverage bottles, plastic containers into our food and beverages, and potentially into us.
So Capillanio was just this sort of job that needed to be done. And we have begun to work with activation of the local populace. We have gotten the attention of the leaders in the municipality. The vice mayor of tourism is in discussion with us, and we're starting to talk with them about the idea of adopting the concept of a plastic-free island, giving up the disposable straws and plastic bottles and bags that are all over the island and adopt a material not of plastic, metal, stone, wood, bamboo, anything, ceramic. And now we are also in discussion with the larger network, the senators of the Ionian prefecture. So we start with one island. It's a template and we want it to spread.
While Pam and Deanna fight for plastic pollution control, many states seem to be doing just the opposite. One such state is Florida, which in 2008 passed a law prohibiting local governments from issuing plastic bag bans. In short, they cannot ban plastic bags. But who would want such a thing?
The Florida Retail Federation is a tremendous opponent of local communities regulating plastic bags. They speak publicly, it's on their website, it's something they're very open about, that they don't think a local community, a city or a county should have that ability to regulate plastics. Florida is the only state that has a bag ban preemption. There are several other states considering bag ban preemptions. That's a ban on banning or regulating or taxing or limiting plastic bags.
In March of 2015, a bill mirroring Florida's law was proposed in Georgia.
So this bill, which was called Senate Bill 139 or SB 139, was a ban against creating a ban against any type of plastic in the state of Georgia. It was going by the common name of the plastic bag ban, because it was a ban against being able to ban things. So it was prohibiting citizens of the state of Georgia to have a say in whether or not they wanted to have plastic bags or plastic containers in their communities, in their environment.
In Florida, we've had bills filed for the last 3 years to try and overturn that preemption. We have not been successful so far. We definitely don't want to see Georgia, our neighbors to the north, or any other states for that matter, have that home rule taken away from them.
This ban is just like preposterous. To ban that which should be banned is completely counterintuitive and counterproductive.
I think it sets back. It's a setback, and it's ill-conceived. One story early on when I was photographing the hawksbill sea turtle, which I photographed at the Aquarium of the Americas in New Orleans, this beautiful animal we were able to photograph that was on display, it had been brought in because it was so sick from ingesting plastic bags, which look a lot like one of its food sources, which are jellyfish. So they brought the animal in and were rehabilitating it and trying to get it to be a little bit bigger and more robust before they released it back into the wild. Plastic is, not really a natural substance, and it can really impede animals' digestive systems, and the sea turtle issue has really come to light.
Plastic is affecting wildlife worldwide. When plastic breaks down, it gets smaller, and it begins to look like fish eggs. And birds that are making long migrations swoop in and they eat that. They eat everything from tiny little plastic nurdles, they're called, to sometimes cigarette lighters. And if you think about a product that isn't going to break down like plastic, eventually it's going to build up in your stomach. And if you started to just stick things in your stomach again and again and again, all this plastic, eventually there is so much plastic in there that there's no room to expand. There's no room for food to go in anymore. And basically they starve to death.
Of all the photographs I've ever made, the wildest and craziest and most unexpected was one that's on display, and it shows the stomach contents of one albatross fledgling, 12.2 ounces of plastic that was taken out of the stomach of an albatross that I got to know when it was alive. I knew it for 7 weeks, and I was waiting for it to fledge, and it was spreading its wings and catching the breeze, and I could tell, oh, it's gonna fly away any day now, because that's what they do after 6 months of being fed by their parents. And then it keeled over and died, and so we did a necropsy, and we discovered this stomach tight as a drum, full, impacted, full of plastic. There's an older gentleman here who's part of the symposium, and he's trying to convince industry to stop using plastic. And I said, "Do you ever get depressed by it?" I said, "You're so charming." And he said, "Well," he said, "at the end of the day, I just tell him I'm not going to be around. It's going to be, I'm not going to have to suffer the consequences the way you will."
I actually met Captain Moore on the South Point of Hawaii. So I was there doing my work, and he was there doing his work. I was there just, not knowing that there was another person even, working on this site, and found the person who had discovered the entire problem for the world in discovering the plastic collection, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in the center of the North Pacific Gyre. We met then, and I was at the point where I was wanting to know the science of this really well, so we immediately struck up a correspondence, and they were extremely generous, the Ecological Foundation, with their information, imagery, and knowledge. And so we just started collaborating and sharing stories.
Albatross is a group I founded originally in 1994 to restore the forest. It was more like a farmer of the sea project, gardening, creating a habitat for the giant kelp. That morphed into this concern with plastic pollution after a return voyage from Hawaii in 1997, when I crossed through this garbage patch when it was extremely calm, and saw plastic not as nearly as concentrated as I see now, but a small amount.
The ocean was actually acting as a kind of giant sorting mechanism, and it was moving this material around. So some places would be a giant net, it would be gone the next day. Other places would be finely particularized pieces of plastic. It was plastic sand. So there were, areas that were just entirely bits of plastic that were the size of lentils, for instance, and no physical sand at all.
You can look at a beach, it looks relatively pristine, and you start looking at the dunes or looking at the sand a little closer, and you notice there's all these tiny fragments of plastic everywhere. The most pristine beaches that we have in our state are covered in plastic. We sometimes joke that surfers are an indicator species, so they're the people who are out in the waves, on the beach, in the ocean, perhaps more than any user group ever. And a lot of our members started noticing plastics everywhere, all the time.
Plastic travels the water vectors, the natural ones like streams and rivers, and the man-made ones, the storm sewers, the sewage systems of the big cities of the planet. Eventually everything ends up in the ocean, so it's downhill from everywhere. And these water vectors are 80% of the plastic gets in the ocean. The other 20% is literally dumped from ships, from drift nets that get tangled and then are cut and abandoned, becoming ghost nets. It's actually maritime law that you can dump things overseas, when you're far enough out of territorial waters.
The action of waves and sun on a beach is to break the plastic into sand. Sand was formerly made by the disintegration of coral and rock and shell. This would have been sand. Many times white, sometimes other colors, sometimes black if it's volcanic. But now the sand is working on this plastic that's coming in with every wave. It's instead of just chewing up rocks and shells and coral, it's also chewing up plastic. So you've got this situation in which there's a new, you might call it feedstock for a sandy beach. And that feedstock is these plastic particles that wash up on the beach.
As Captain Moore and his crew have been tracking the amount of plastic accumulation over the years, they've implemented the use of manta trawls, which have been a key factor in his excursions.
A manta trawl is a trawl shaped like a manta ray. They're zooplankton feeders, so they have a wide mouth and wings, and they glide through the water very gracefully and strain out the plankton. Well, that's what a manta trawl does. It glides through the water gracefully and strains out the plankton like a manta ray, and we use it on the surface to determine how much plastic is in the ocean. Marine snow is the detritus of the marine environment. It's the particulates that rain down on the ocean floor. See, most of the biological activity on the surface of the Earth is not in the upper atmosphere, it's near the soil. But in the ocean, it's the opposite. Most of the biological activity is near the surface, and it drains down into the deeper layers. So that settling effect is snow. And the carbon that's brought out of the atmosphere by the creatures that have breathed it in and then died and taken their carbonaceous bodies to the bottom of the ocean. That process called carbon sequestration is stymied. It's slowed down by the addition of flotsam in there, which are these small plastic fibers. The consequences are disastrous for our entire ecosystem. Not just the marine ecosystem, but the terrestrial ecosystem as well suffers from this kind of pollution. It's starving fish, it's tangling whales, it's just killing so many millions of creatures in the ocean that would not have otherwise been killed, that it's bound to have deleterious consequences on biodiversity and the environment as a whole.
Then the solution should be simple. Create a large quantity of manta trawls and skim the ocean.
I think it's a matter of scale. The ocean is a third of the surface area of the entire globe. That's an enormous area to try to clean up. It's just not economically feasible to do it.
It's very cradle to grave. So we're not really thinking about the next generation. We're not even thinking next day. We're just thinking about ourselves in that minute. And we're so selfish and so dissociated that it has absolutely zero awareness towards the bigger picture. It's just not viable anymore. It's draining our resources, it's polluting our planet, and ultimately it's compromising human health. And I think that's where the real concern lies. When it comes boomerangs on us and affects us.
We're surrounded by plastic, and the problems that it causes are becoming more well known. Most people have seen plastic garbage on the streets. Most people, if they live near beaches, have seen it on beaches. And if you haven't seen it directly, there's more and more in the media about it and the dangers that it presents to wildlife and most especially human life. We're not disconnected from this.
When we understand that the things that are going wrong in nature are also going wrong in our bodies, then we can see the connection between those, and we can make those linkages, and we can realize that what's good for the ocean is good for us. What's good for nature and the planet and all the creatures on the planet is also good for us. We were literally being shown the ocean's state of being, or its consciousness, or its awareness of, it is the source of life on this planet. It is the source of all beings and the consciousness of all the animals that have lived and do live in the ocean now. So it's not just a physical entity. It's not just forces of nature. It is life.
Of course, everyone enjoys being out in nature, and it's important to protect what's left of our special, unique places in Georgia and elsewhere, and it's also a health concern. If we don't have a clean environment, we cannot be healthy.
Well, I think we don't want to couch this as just an environmental issue. It's a health issue, it's an economic issue, it's a quality of life issue. Plastics impact every single aspect of not only our life, but every aspect of the world, of our global economy, of everything we do. It's a huge issue, and it's something that I think we have to deal with urgently. And who knows what the health implications will be of that, what the ultimate environmental implications will be. It's really scary, and it's very alarming.
We don't think about them beyond the fact that they're constantly around us. This was just such a clear symbol of this kind of travesty of taking this physical material of the earth, the oil, the ancient life, the fossil sunlight of the planet, which is petroleum, and turning it into these objects which we use but are careless about. They leave our hands, and yet they come back to haunt us in the form of these drifters, these objects that have traveled the earth, that have impacted lives and creatures and physical forces of nature, and come back to tell these stories. I think of it as dark matter. It's not of this earth. It's something that was created from, chemical processes and materials, but it's something that never existed before, so we did make it. And the earth really isn't suited to break it down like it does everything else. To me, it's almost the perfect material representation of, first of all, our ego, but even more specifically, I think our id, our sort of wanton, willful child that's decided that we want to remake the world in plastic, that we can make anything we want out of plastic, and we do. So I have found any nameable object that you can imagine has been replicated in plastic. And we see it around us all the time in sort of synthetic alligator skins, and there's fake wood, there's fake palm trees, there's, any kind of object you can imagine has been replicated, campfire logs. It's strange. So all of these things are this sort of strange manifestation of our will to be godlike and to recreate everything that has already been made in this substance that never goes away. So it's chilling for me in that regard.